I'm Laura Backel from the Eastern Research Group. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Backel from the Eastern Research Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth offering in our webinar series, Planning for Clean Water. Today, our topic is how to leverage conservation, open space, and parks funding to maximize multiple benefits. We're going to start as usual with a couple of polls. So where are you located? Please let us know. We'll hold that out for just a minute. All right, let's see who we've got on the line today. Wow, this is great. So Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Washington, D.C., Virginia, West Virginia, who else? And 7% other. That's great. Thank you so much. If you get a chance, please let us know what other is in the chat there. So let's go ahead and move to the next poll. What sector do you work in? Got local government, regional government, and other. Please put in the chat if it's other. Let's poll 2. We'll give it a minute. And while we're doing that, I'll just go over briefly what the agenda is today. In a little bit, I'm going to turn it over to the National Capital Area chapter for a chapter welcome. We'll have some presentations. We'll have panel questions and answers, and then a little bit about the next webinar. So pretty straightforward today. We're going to try something new called Mentimeter. So we'll see if that works out. And we're almost ready to go. So any results from poll 2? Oh, wow, lots of local government. That's great. Regional government, state government, all very well representative. A few feds, hello feds, and a private sector nonprofit. Got some academics, and that's it for that. Let's move on. So just to overview credits, here's the APACM credit number that you can search on. ASFPM, just go ahead and email me for that ASFPM credit. Okay, take it away, Martina.
All right, thank you, Laura. And APA Virginia is happy to support this webinar series from a logistical standpoint. Once again, this is just a reminder for those who are with us today that throughout this presentation, we encourage you to submit your questions. Please submit your questions. There are a couple of options you'll see at the bottom, but please submit your questions for the presenters in that Q&A box. Why we do this is because oftentimes questions get lost in that chat box, and we don't want to lose your questions that we take at the end. We encourage you to chat with your presenters and other colleagues who are here today. But the questions that you want to be submitted to the presenters to be taken at the Q&A, please put them in that Q&A box. We'll also be answering them throughout. Some of our presenters will answer them in the Q&A box in typing. Also, if you would like to unmute, request to be unmuted and ask your question directly to a presenter, you can use the raise the hand option and we can unmute you and you can interact with us one-on-one. You can even turn your camera on if you like, you don't have to. And then the if you have any issues or questions, you can message us directly, whether it's me or Laura. You can message us directly and we can help you. We will also send a message out reminding you what that CM number is and what the different continuing education credit numbers are. As a reminder, this webinar, like all the others, are recorded. They'll be posted to our YouTube page along with a link to all the resources. So if you have any questions, please just let us know and we're happy to help. One quick reminder from the APA Virginia chapter, and thank you, Laura, for letting me make this 1-second plug, is that the APA Virginia board nominations are open until next Friday, April 29th. So we would ask that you submit all your APA Virginia board nominations to our chapter past president and planning for inclusion vice president. I will put those email addresses in the chat box so you have them. But again, just a quick reminder that our call for board nominations is still open till next Friday. So thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you. Also, just for some more fun, we're going to try a new technique today called Mentimeter. And I'm going to turn it over to Caroline for just a minute to fill us in on how to use this, if you want to try to use this tool.
Great. So yeah, Mentimeter is basically an interactive audience engagement platform that we're using today. And we can use polls, multiple choice, open-ended questions. And we're going to have 3 questions laid out today. And in order to join Mentimeter, you have 3 options. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat. So the first option is to just follow the link on Google. The second option is to go to menti.com and enter in this code, which I can provide in the chat as well, or scan the QR code on the screen now with your mobile device if you would prefer to use your phone over a computer.
Great. Thank you so much. So just a recap of the agenda today. We'll have our welcome in a minute from Ross, and then presentations from John Griffin, Renee Thompson, Michael Stringer, and Carolyn Besant. And now leave that up there just for a minute while I introduce Ross, and I'm going to read this because this is wonderful. Ross T. Kennedy is the incoming Professional Development Officer for the National Capital Area Chapter of APA. Mr. Kennedy is a community planner for the Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command within the Asset Management Branch, Facility Management Division. He manages shore-based infrastructure and military construction projects and leads the climate change resiliency efforts at the Naval Academy. He is a dedicated and innovative project manager with experience using the power of planning, urban design, land use controls, zoning, citizen engagement, and geospatial technologies to create solutions that empower communities to achieve resilience through master planning that is inclusive, innovative, and mindful of present-day challenges. Specialties include climate change and resiliency, land use policy, zoning, economic development, construction management, environmental planning, and facility maintenance and management. Mr. Kennedy is currently obtaining a PhD in urban and regional planning with a focus in environmental engineering and land use at Jackson State University. He holds a bachelor's of political science and economics from Hampton University and a master's of urban and regional planning, environmental engineering from California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. He is a financial member of the Alpha Omega chapter of the Omega Phi Psi Phi fraternity, sorry about that, Incorporated, and a financial member of Zion Lodge number 4 of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Maryland. So I'm turning it over to Ross. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. For our first presenter, we're going to have Mr. John Griffin. He is the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership Program Manager. As a partnership coordinator, John works to advance large landscape conservation initiatives in the Chesapeake Bay watershed by convening diverse multidisciplinary stakeholders. The partnership seeks to extend the conservation of large landscapes throughout the region to benefit multiple values, including sustainability, scenic, historic, and cultural heritage, working lands, important biodiversity and wildlife habitats, water quality and supply, and overall quality of life. John is a former Secretary of Maryland Department of Natural Resources under 2 governors, the Deputy Secretary of the Department, the General Manager of the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, and served as the Chief of Staff for Governor Martin O'Malley. He brings decades of experience with resource conservation and environmental protection, as well as relationships across the Chesapeake watershed. John holds a Bachelor of Arts from Sociology from Niagara University and a Master of Arts in Social Work from the Catholic University of America.
Thank you, Raz. We all set? Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. I'm going to do a very quick overview. And I have on drums Amelia Lowe, who's my Chesapeake Conservation Corps intern, who's going to move the slides for me. Okay, Amelia. So I thought this quote, conservation investment is an expression of our faith in the future of natural systems that are essential to life on Earth. Very apt, it seems to me. The history of land conservation in the Chesapeake Bay watershed could be marked primarily by the acquisition of Mount Vernon back in 1853. And interestingly enough, in the early 60s, there was development proposed within their viewshed of Mount Vernon across the river in Maryland. And so the National Park Service and those in federal office at that time established the first national park, Piscataway Park, to keep the scenic viewshed unalterated. And that was actually the first national park created primarily for its scenic importance. Next. Of course, you're all familiar, I think, with the Appalachian Trail. What you may not know is a quarter of it runs through Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And that was established in 1937. Next. This, of course, is the Cno Canal Towpath, and former late Justice Douglas fought to keep this from being a motored highway or parkway. And now it's a heavily utilized trail, if you will, along the canal from right outside of Washington up to Cumberland. There's a connecting trail called the Great Allegheny Passage from Pittsburgh down to the terminus of this part of it. So anyway, just some key assets. Here's others. We're very benefited by the number of national parks, refuges, heritage areas, and hundreds of state parks, et cetera, both at the state and local level. Next slide. Just a brief few slides on the Conservation Partnership. This was initially established, the foundation of it in 2009, pursuant to former President Obama's executive order on the Chesapeake Bay, which had a section dealing with land conservation. And that's when we started. So we've been around now 13 years as a partnership. Here are many, but not all of the members. We're up to about 80. But this gives you an idea of the scope and breadth of the partnership. Next. And this is our mission, which you can see there. Okay, next. As I was alluding to, the Chesapeake Bay Agreement does have this goal in it by 2025 to conserve another 2 million acres of land over the 2010 baseline. And then special emphasis on acres of wetlands and acres of forest land of the highest value. We're doing pretty well on forests, even though we continue to lose a lot. But wetlands, we're a little behind the goal, but we hope to make both of these by 2025. Next. So that's the goal, the immediate goal in front of us. 2 million more acres by 2025. Renee Thompson's going to talk more about our Chesapeake Conservation Atlas, but I wanted to just use this slide speaking to the targeting idea, because this is what's called valued lands map, and it's a consolidation of farms, forests, habitat, and heritage values where they exhibit themselves most on the landscape of the Chesapeake watershed, and those are in dark gray. Next slide. I want to send your attention to the bottom set of numbers. Back a couple of years ago, about 4.5 million acres were developed in one form or another. As of early 2018, 9.2 million acres have been protected in the Bay watershed. And then I just referenced the most valued area maps. And so we still have about 28% of those not protected. Okay, next slide. Excuse me. The precipitating event was a treatise that E.L. Wilson, famous conservation biologist, grandfather of biodiversity, who passed away sadly last December, came out with this book describing in some length the age of the Anthropocene age, or the age of man, that we're currently in. And we are losing species already. We're already in it, as most scientists believe. And his goal was to conserve 50% of valuable lands and waters on the planet to conserve 85% of species biodiversity. And the short-term estimate is over the next 2 decades, basically by 2050, we're going to lose another 1 million species of wildlife and plants and invertebrates. So based on that and a lot of work that the partnership did in 2009, we adopted the next step in achieving E.L. Wilson's vision, which is to conserve 30% of valuable watershed lands by 2030. So that means, based on the last accounting of lands acquired, which again was early 2018, we have about 3.3 million acres to permanently protect by 2030. A big stretch goal, but something very important to try to achieve. Next slide. Conservation goals. I've talked about the partnership's goals, and the goals at the state level are set out in the state conservation outdoor recreation plans, which are required by the National Park Service of states in order to continue to receive their share of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is a federal land acquisition park development program that's been around forever. And just 2 years ago, the Great American Outdoors Act passed that for the first time in the history of this program, fully funded the program from oil and gas offshore leasing revenues. So if you want to look at individual goals, it's good to look at the SCORPs. And then some states, for example, Virginia and Maryland, have represented that in a series of GIS map overlays. As you can see there, federal and state land acquisition programs. Okay, this is incomplete, but this gives you some sense of where the states are. So you can see Maryland has adopted its budget for fiscal year 23 starting July 1, and that's a representation of their appropriations. Pennsylvania, we had to use the year ending June 30 because the legislature and the governor may not adopt a budget for fiscal year 23 until July or August. And then in Virginia, as those of you in Virginia at least may know, the governor and the legislature have still not agreed on a budget. So they're negotiating. So what this represents is the differences on these programs between the House and the Senate. We picked the higher amount, being optimistic. And this also includes probably the major land conservation program in the state of Virginia, which is the Virginia Outdoors Foundation has a transferable tax credit. You know, these are statewide figures, so in some cases, not so much Maryland, but Pennsylvania, Virginia all of those states' boundaries are not within the watershed. And I would also mention with Pennsylvania that there's pending a $500 million appropriation from the American Recovery Act for what's called Growing Greener, which is an omnibus program. And these amounts do not include the state grants that come through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And the other states, we just were not able to in a relatively short period of time, get their budget information. Next. Federal funding. As I mentioned, one major driver to increase federal funding was the Great American Outdoors Act, which provided to the Land and Water Conservation Fund full funding for the first time. So you can see the various federal land acquisition programs there, and that's the total, over $1 billion, which is a major increase from the last time we compared federal to state, where the states collectively were, I don't know, probably 80-some% of the overall funding in the watershed for land conservation. And also, of course, local governments acquire lands for conservation purposes as well. And we haven't included that here. Next. Okay, a big announcement a few weeks ago. President Biden, a year or so ago, issued a policy called Great American Outdoors Act. And his goal was to achieve protection of 30% of valuable lands and waters in the US by 2030. And so in order to start to get the ball rolling, they launched this $1 billion challenge grant to support and accelerate locally led conservation restoration projects. So and so over the next 5 years, I think the federal government's going to be allocating a total of about, well, in round numbers, close to $500 million. And that's going to be matched by private and philanthropic sources. A lot of foundations committed that they're going to try to match dollar by dollar the roughly $500 million that the federal government's going to be putting into this. And I want to emphasize, particularly for local governments, while this little subheading here doesn't say local governments, we're pretty sure they intend to include local governments. And this program's, we're expected the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is going to issue an RFP sometime in May, and then proposals will have to be back in by July, and they hope to make the first year of rewards by August. But that, to me, is a fairly ambitious schedule, which will probably slip. Okay, next, please. These are on the left, the 8 principles established in America the Beautiful plan. And to the right are some overarching goal areas that also have to be, so it's a combination of, in terms of proposals to be submitting them that are responsive to the 8 principles and also fit into one of these categories. And I would emphasize on the core areas of need, expanding out access to outdoors, particularly for underserved communities. The partnership has a public health, green space, and equity plan we developed to really concentrate resources in providing in communities a green space of a variety of sorts. There's ample and continuing growing studies demonstrating the importance of people spending time in the outdoors. And in a lot of these communities, they don't have the wherewithal to go 3 miles to a park. So we've got to provide greening, maybe to some extent, smaller scale in those underserved communities. So that's a big priority of this plan. America the Beautiful and other conservation partnerships efforts. Next slide. So I just wanted to leave you with this thought. In the last several years, the whole notion of connecting communities to open space, parks to one another through open space, wildlife corridors that can also serve as human trails. Connections is the real idea here, and you're going to hear and see some of that later by other presenters. So, just think about ways in your own work that you can plan for connections of communities, particularly underserved communities, to green space, and other connections between parks, etc. So I hope I kept my time okay. And thank you very much for the opportunity to share this overview.
Before Ross introduces the next two speakers, we're going to do a quick Mentimeter poll. So I'm going to turn it over to Caroline.
Great, so I just put the Mentimeter link in the chat, as well as the other option of the website and access code. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so we can see your contributions in live time.
Well, this is really fascinating. So a whole lot of folks use comprehensive plans, including green infrastructure and parks planning for open space acquisition. I see zoning ordinances, lots of people using conservation easements and purchase of development rights. It's really amazing. Thank you, Caroline. I'm going to turn it back over to Ross to introduce the next two speakers.
Thanks, Laura. So our first speaker is Mr. Michael Stringer, AICP. He is a senior planner in Anne Arundel County Office of Planning and Zoning. He has over 15 years of experience in community and environmental planning. He specializes in community engagement and planning for redevelopment and land conservation. He has helped communities develop award-winning plans for revitalization after structural economic changes and for resiliency to flooding and sea level rise. He's worked for nonprofit organizations, local government, and prior to joining Anne Arundel County was a principal at a private consulting firm. He earned an undergraduate degree in English and environmental science at Rutgers University, as well as a master's degree in conservation biology and sustainable development from the University of Maryland. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ms. Renee Thompson as well. She's going to be going after Mr. Stringer. So Ms. Renee Thompson is a geographer for the USGS and is based in the Chesapeake Bay Program office in Annapolis, Maryland. She is the coordinator for the Maintain Healthy Watershed Goal Implementation Team at CBP and maintains her CBP protected lands dataset. Renee is passionate about land conservation and decision support tools to support scientific decision-making. She has a master's in community planning from the Urban Studies and Planning URSP program at University of Maryland, where she focused on environmental planning. In her spare time, Renee can be found on her stand-up paddle board, exploring the tributaries around the region, skiing in the winter, and enjoying downtime with her family in Washington, DC, where she resides with her husband and 2 children. To you, Mr. Stringer.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Appreciate it. So, as Ross said, I'm a senior planner with Anne Arundel County, which is in central Maryland. And I know there's a lot of local planners and consultants working for local governments here. So really want to kind of share that perspective into this conversation. So to contribute some ideas about how we've used multiple benefits approach to land conservation and some examples of recent projects. Now, when we think about multiple benefits, these are often the categories we start thinking about, right? Kind of start from habitat conservation, thinking about how that can dovetail with public recreation. Our county has a very active and effective agricultural and woodland preservation program focused on preserving those rural agricultural parts of our state, of our county. Water quality, of course, is a key issue for our communities along Chesapeake Bay, and increasingly flood risk reduction. As we think more about this idea too, there's new emerging ideas that are coming up more prominently in our work, especially equity, environmental justice, and even thinking about homeland security, which I'll talk about in a moment. And often multiple benefits leads to multiple funding sources. As we explore these opportunities from different perspectives, we can often unlock additional potential funding sources. But making those different funding sources work together requires a lot of alignment, thinking about their objectives, thinking about the funding requirements, timing, to make sure these can be effective in each individual project. I'll go in a little bit more detail as we go forward on some of the programs we use, but here's kind of an overview like John gave, a lot of the same funding sources, but some local twists as well. Before I talk more about Anne Arundel County, I want to share some experience I had working on the West Coast. I spent about 15 years living and working in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. And one of the best examples I've seen in my career for a multiple benefits approach to conservation and restoration was the floodplains by design effort. And this program is also known by a few different names in local spaces where it's been applied, thinking about farms, fish, and floods, or other approaches of thinking about integrated floodplain management. It's really been a powerful paradigm for turning conflicts into collaboration. This approach really started from the emphasis in the Pacific Northwest on recovery of salmon populations. Their listing as underneath the Endangered Species Act was a huge driver for land conservation and restoration. Now, one of the key strategies for salmon recovery is restoration of streams and floodplains. So that often meant taking land that had been diked off and drained for farmland, converting it back into active floodplain for fish habitat. And in many areas, this began to lead to conflicts with farmers seeing a net loss of their productivity, of their critical mass of agricultural land to fish. This began to create some real fundamental identity conflicts between Native American tribes, environmental advocacy groups, and rural and agricultural residents. But as people started to look back and think bigger picture about this, thinking about the multiple benefits and multiple objectives that can be achieved with these projects, they really started to think about how can we implement these projects where we can improve habitat while also improving drainage of farmland, reducing downstream flood risk. And this led to coalitions developing where you had farmers working with the Native American tribes and environmental groups and local governments to be able to think about big scale projects on a whole watershed basis of how they can interact together to improve conditions for fish, farms, and flood risk reduction. Now, the Nature Conservancy played a huge role in this, working with the State Department of Ecology and then the state's agency that was created to lead Puget Sound recovery, the Puget Sound Partnership. And they organized, seeing these grassroots efforts happening around the state, organized a new funding program that they termed Floodplains by Design. And with this funding program, it was actually so successful that when they brought it to the state legislature for the first offering, the state legislature not only dramatically supported it, but gave them more money than they asked for. They asked for about $30 million the first year. The state legislature gave them about 50. They love these coalitions of bringing different perspectives and property owners together and actually said, go out and bring us more of these. And since then, it's been continually supported by the state legislature, and they've been able to leverage other funds from FEMA for flood risk reduction to salmon recovery funds to other types of funding programs to be able to make these projects work. And it's been exactly because of that core idea of bringing together different needs, different parties together to be able to solve multiple problems. Has been the most effective thing about this. What's been interesting too is that as this has evolved, the whole conversation starts to change a little bit as you start to really respect these different benefits. We're not just talking about how many acres of land were preserved or how many miles of stream habitat were restored, but it's starting to talk about how many acres of farmland were protected or improved with drainage, how many homes and structures were improved, how many jobs were created or retained through these projects. And that has had a completely different resonance with especially in the legislature for the funding side. Folks who may not care that much about salmon recovery and habitat might care a lot about flood risk in their towns or care a lot about agricultural sustainability. So it's been able to build coalition at the state legislature as well for funding. And having that conversation using those different terms has really broadened the support base for these projects. Now, coming back home, where I now reside in Anne Arundel County, let me give you a bit of an overview for context before I introduce some specific projects. As the map shows here, Anne Arundel in red there is in the center of Maryland, right between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. We have the state capital of Annapolis. It's a county that's grown to almost 600,000 people. It's mainly a suburban and rural landscape pattern, developing as suburbs to those two major cities of Baltimore and Washington, D.C. We're blessed to have over 530 miles of shoreline along the Chesapeake Bay, lots of creeks and rivers through this area. We also have a pretty significant federal presence. We've got the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Over in the west part of the county, we have Fort Meade and the National Security Agency, which after the big base realignment efforts and the increase of all their cybersecurity has actually become one of the largest military installations in the country and employs over 50,000 people. We also have a research refuge managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and also the Smithsonian has about a 2,000 acre parcel that is the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center on the shore of Chesapeake Bay. Now, we asked in the Mentimeter poll about using different plans to coordinate and leverage conservation efforts. In our county, we've tried to interweave land conservation into our growth management planning and our parks and recreation planning. As a county in Maryland, we comply with our state's growth management law, and we have a comprehensive plan. We call it the General Development Plan. We just updated it and adopted our latest version last year, call it Plan 2040. In that, we have an overarching policy framework for land development and conservation that's focused on trying to promote revitalization, redevelopment in our more urbanized areas, trying to focus development around transit and infrastructure facilities, and trying to keep the rural parts of our county rural, and trying to protect our sensitive environmental areas. We also have our land preservation, parks and recreation plan. That's our master plan countywide for parks. That's currently being updated, should be adopted this year. And then we actually just adopted, just last month, our green infrastructure master plan. And that's our countywide plan for land conservation with a focus on prioritizing the most ecologically important areas and considering multiple benefits of ecosystem services and connectivity between these areas. I'll talk a little bit more about that plan in just a moment. One that we've been very mindful of in the last 2 years, it's been nice to actually develop these plans in such close time together. We've had the same staff literally working on each of these plans, collaborating with the different departments of planning and zoning, recreation and parks, public works, and really try to be very specific about keeping similar language and goals throughout the three. So if you pick one up and you see that we've got a goal of conserving so many acres, it's in the other ones as well. We're talking about the same types of places that we're prioritizing. They across all three documents. So whether you're thinking about countywide growth policy, parks management, or landscape conservation, you're seeing the same goals and policies reflected throughout. For our green infrastructure plan, we took a multiple benefits approach with that, thinking about the benefits for wildlife, for water quality, for recreation, as well as public health. And it's been interesting, taking that broader approach allowed us to talk to different audiences. When we talked to environmental groups, they were really excited about the water quality and habitat piece. When we talked to property owners and groups representing our rural areas of the county, they were supportive of the idea of land conservation to preserve the character of those communities. When we did targeted outreach to try to get to those underserved communities, the public health aspects really stuck out to them. Meeting the needs and recognizing, acknowledging the desires of people where they are. And taking, again, that multiple benefits approach helps us tailor conversation to be able to meet those folks where they are. This plan was built on a lot of technical analysis, using a lot of the resources that have been developed regionally and through the state. Our State Department of Natural Resources has developed a lot of ecological models to identify the most high quality habitats, locations of endangered species, areas where forests are in best condition, where water quality needs are highest. integrated a lot of the information and ground truthed it at the local government level, looking at plats, looking at subdivision applications, understanding where land has already been protected through easements or dedications to the subdivision process. Those are the areas on the map that are in the dark green, and have a faintly can see it here, but they've got a black dot pixelation over them if they're already conserved, whether through those regulatory programs from dedications through subdivision or outright park acquisition or conservation easements from either the state, local government, or private land trusts. We also, in this, looked at how we can connect these different spaces. A lot of that is long stream corridors, since we do have a lot of waterways in the county, but we're also looking at potential corridors and connections between areas that may already have some levels of development. So this is based on those green infrastructure models that are actually developed at the state level, ground truth locally. In this, we also set a conservation goal that aligns with those regional and now becoming global ideas of 30 by 30. So we set a conservation goal in this plan to conserve 30% of the entire county land base by 2030. And within this connected network, we've made great progress towards that goal, and we think we can achieve it with by that time frame. We had set a numeric goal of about 5,000 more acres to conserve at that time. Now, let me talk about some specific examples of how we actually fund projects in the county. This graphic gives you an illustration of how the county has approached funding for open space conservation and parks over the last 20 years. You can see that the big gray chunk of the circle, the donut there, is the backbone of our funding, which is the state program open space fund that John referenced earlier. This is funded through a 0.5% state property transfer tax. It gets allocated back out to the counties. There's also a competitive pool that they set aside as well. So we've got an annual allocation that we can budget and depend on year over year. Of course, it goes up and down with budget and real estate cycles, but it gives us some state funding that we can plan forward to into the future. And when we have exceptional projects, we can go petition also for those competitive funds within that program. We match that with typically county funds through our bonds. We've also leveraged Land and Water Conservation Fund dollars in a few projects, and private philanthropy has played a key role in several projects as well. You'll see the fee in lieu is mentioned there as well. Maryland has its Forest Conservation Act, and we do have a fee in lieu option for that. So that way, when development projects come in and they can't meet the forest requirements on site, they're able to pay fee in lieu. We're able to use those dollars. We grant them out to local land trusts to be able to come in and show us afforestation or forest preservation projects that can meet those goals. So that ends up becoming a key support for us because we can really leverage it to support outside organizations beyond the county's capacity to take on these projects. And let me show you a few examples how we've been able to leverage different funding sources together to achieve multiple benefits. One I'll highlight here is a recent project that we were able to expand one of the marquee regional parks in the county. This is Quiet Waters Park. The locator map in the upper left here shows the city of Annapolis. It's on a big peninsula here, and Quiet Waters is just south of that. We were able to acquire almost 20 acres of land immediately adjacent to the park and right on the waterfront there, using multiple funding sources and aligning the objectives of multiple parties. This project really came together with the help of Chesapeake Conservancy, another nonprofit that's active in the area. And with their help, we were able to engage the US Navy to actually bring in federal funds. It was a unique partnership for us to be able to get conservation dollars from the US Navy. And the land trust was also able to bring in private philanthropy that was able to close the deal. Here's our capital stack for the project. Again, the backbone of it was our state program open space dollars. We were able to leverage that with $1 million of federal funds from this Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, REPI, which is a Department of Defense fund that's really focused around compatibility, conservation of land around military installations and the places they operate. And this has been tremendously effective in some other communities in Maryland as well, because we've got things like the Patuxent Naval Base where they're doing a lot of jet flights. So they've got a pretty broad area that they're interested in conserving. So on the eastern shore of Maryland, there's been some very significant land conservation using these funds. The Chesapeake Conservancy was also able to bring in that private donation, as I mentioned. It was interesting trying to align these things. The military was really interested in this because of its proximity to the Naval Academy, and also because of the public waterfront access we were giving. Their operational needs over the last few years have required them to restrict some public access on waterfront. So they were interested in seeing opportunities to be able to kind of offset that in other spaces. They're also becoming increasingly interested in a strong partner for us in thinking about climate resiliency and sea level rise. Naval Academy, as you would think, is real close to the water, very low elevation. So there's been a lot of partnership in thinking about resilience for climate change. And this funding source has been able to help fund some projects to increase resiliency. It's interesting, I mentioned before, kind of the tricks of alignment. This federal REPU program, they've got their own easements and stewardship requirements they want on property. Our program open space dollars have certain requirements around access and easements on property. So we actually were able to, this property was large enough, we actually divided it and applied different funds to different parts of the property to make sure that the easements and requirements didn't conflict with each other. But there have been some cases where we had to basically switch up funding sources to make sure that our long-term requirements and easements in these properties can align with the funding sources. Let me show you another example that's been innovative for us as we're starting to think about climate resiliency, flood risk reduction is actually starting to buy out properties that are flood prone. This picture shows a backyard of a property that we just acquired last year. Through our pilot program, we actually had a public solicitation for property owners within areas at risk to non-tidal flooding. We were able to use our stormwater funds. We have a fee based on impervious surface that we apply to support our stormwater retrofits and stream restoration water quality projects to meet our NPDES permit requirements. We're able to use those funds to actually leverage this as well to kind of make the water quality play about how removing properties from the floodplain can help support water quality as well. This was a really effective kind of first dip of our toe in the water of this, and we currently have applications pending with FEMA through the Building Resilient Communities, the BRIC funds, to try to expand this effort into the future. One other innovation that we're doing in Anne Arundel County is we've actually established with the city of Annapolis a resilience authority. The idea of investing in infrastructure to be able to support resilience to sea level rise and climate change is going to be an incredibly huge effort, as we're seeing across the country. One that was large enough that we thought it would be important to create its own entity to really start to hold some of this. So last year, both the city and the county adopted mirroring legislation to create this new entity. So it's a quasi-governmental new agency that will have its own executive director and CFO. It'll have a board that includes appointees from both the city and the county, and then county and city staff will serve as support to it. And the idea of setting it up as its own institution is to allow it to have that single focus, not be drawn off by having to take care of roads and other things, but really focus on resiliency, and to have the flexibility outside of our rigid purchasing and funding requirements as a local government, that hopefully this entity will be able to be more flexible in entering into public-private partnerships, leveraging private grants and other funding sources. So this is just a beginning idea for us. We're just in the course of setting up the staffing and getting this up on its feet. So it'll be something interesting to track in the future. There's 2 other Maryland counties that have also set up these resilience authorities, and it's going to be interesting to see how effective these models can be into the future. And let me circle back to these emerging issues around equity. One of the important things that we did in the Green Infrastructure Plan, as well as in our comprehensive plan, and the Parks Plan, is to really weave equity into the whole thing, acknowledging that we have disparities in our county. This map shows areas, it shows a equity analysis relative to parks. So those areas in yellow, orange, and red are areas where we have low access to parks, but we have low income, concentrations of communities of color, we have poor public health outcomes. And when we look at this kind of analysis, it reflects across whether it's parks, socioeconomics, access to good jobs and education, these same geographies pop up. So we've tried to weave through all of our plans the need to focus county investment to support these areas. And what's been interesting as we get into that is starting to humbly work with the folks already working in these communities. A lot of them have been subjected to impacts that have been caused by county policies over the last 50 plus years. So coming in with humility to listen to what their concerns are, which have often been ignored in the past, to make sure that we're walking alongside them to support their needs, and thinking about what's important to them from green space needs as we think about land conservation. Pocket parks, street trees, community gardens are not what we have been thinking about in the last 50 years of land conservation in the county. So it's taking us opening up the way we communicate and the way that we're going to start looking at lands for conservation. And with that, I'd like to transfer over to Renee to show us some tools that her organization has developed actually to help communities be able to prioritize and think about these different perspectives like equity and conservation.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. And I'm just gonna share my screen now. Good afternoon, thank you so much for having me today. So we're gonna shift gears a little bit and talk a little more about opportunities to leverage conservation targeting tools. Specifically, I'm gonna be doing sort of a lightning format of some resources that are relevant, I think, to this audience that could potentially augment some of the work that you all are doing in your local areas. So without further ado, I'll dive in there. So the first set of tools I want to talk to you about are really related to how can we couple conservation and restoration and begin to be strategic about where we're conserving lands with an aim at restoration and resiliency.
Hey, Renee, I hate to interrupt you. If you hit display settings at the top of your screen, we're looking at your presenter notes.
Oh, yeah,
I can do that. If you just hit display settings at the top, at the very top of your screen.
Yeah, I have your screen.
And if you hit you click
swap, actually, is probably what I want to do. Okay,
yep, there you go. Perfect.
Perfect. That is, I have two monitors and
no problem. It's a 50-50 chance.
All right. Well, you guys got
there. You go. Perfect.
There. So another tool, and a lot of these are sort of standalone applications that you can work with individually, or you can work with and bringing layers in. And I'll demonstrate that in a few moments. But these are some sort of recent data sets that we've created under the leadership of our GIS team lead, John Wolf at the Bay program. And some of this can be really helpful if you're trying to target certain geographic areas or land use types and really wanting to understand benefits around water quality improvements with other priorities that you might have. So we've actually taken the time to organize some of this information at a watershed scale to help with that targeting potential. I'm going to back up one because somehow in that we jumped right over the Chesapeake Conservation Atlas that John alluded to. This is a great resource and collection of raster map layers really aimed at identifying where the high value farm, forest, habitat, heritage, and human health areas are located. And then what John showed you earlier was sort of a composite of all of those things to really try to pull out what are the highest value lands related to those priorities across the watershed. And so I'm going to drop some links into the chat after I'm done talking, but I do want to draw your attention on this website. There's a really wonderful story map that can kind of walk you through all of the information that is included in the atlas. Another dashboard that we have that we've been working with, EPA has recently been trying to identify well, I'll talk about that next, but this data set provides percent people of color, percent low income, linguistically isolated. This is all information that's being fed from EJ Screen. So it's not different than what EPA is publishing. We've just sort of brought it into a lot of our mapping applications to allow a little bit more usability. And then furthermore, EPA is focusing on what they're calling most effective basins. And we're really trying to figure out how to allocate additional funds for areas that we can improve water quality and also target underrepresented communities. And there's a lot of, there's a specific definition for this, but what I like about this dashboard that they've made is that there's some additional layers that you can start to dig into beyond income and and people of color. And so if you're interested in things like unemployment or perhaps very young people wanting to target, or elderly folks, or perhaps folks that don't have a high school education, or maybe wanting to look at a combination of those factors, that can be a great resource for you to look at. And I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. So in response to a lot of feedback that we've had, we've been working to create a collection of maps. USGS and Scott Phillips as well has been instrumental in kind of trying to collate and put together all of these different decision support tools that we have. That graphic on the left really represents the kind of depth and breadth of the silos that those decision support tools can fall in. And obviously there's an opportunity to look at co-benefits across all of those applications. And this tool, the targeting dashboard, is really a great place to start if you don't know where to start. So, you know, this will walk you through ask you some questions about what your priorities are. And there's links to all kinds of tools directly from here. In fact, everything that I've reviewed with you today is actually in here. And so I wanted to take a moment. Michael and I had an opportunity to chat last Friday, and I am going to back out of my presentation on purpose now, but we had a chance to back out to talk last Friday about how maybe we could bring to bear some of the decision support tools and data layers that we're developing to help expand this analysis that where we want to target conservation in underrepresented communities in Anne Arundel County. So we have a lot of decision support tools and resources. Personally, I'm the lead of the Healthy Watershed Goal Team, and we've developed a dashboard related to the Chesapeake Healthy Watershed Assessment. And so I like working in this platform because I'm familiar with these data layers and I'm familiar with this web mapping application. One of the great things that I love about a lot of our decision support tools and dashboards is that we can bring layers in from anywhere. And so in this example, I've actually brought up Michael's green infrastructure layer that we can see here. And if you scroll, I'm just going to do this once so you can see how to do it. But essentially, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can learn a little bit more about where the data comes from. And any feature service, you can actually grab this URL at the top and then bring that into your data set here. So there's an add data button. And I've actually already done this because we're running live here. And so we don't want to have you wait for me to fumble with cut and pasting. But essentially, you can search for any of the data within our open data. You can see I work with a lot of our protected lands data. I've got federal lands in here. There's also information related to all of the Chesapeake Bay outcome agreements that have geographic GIS information related to them. So if you're interested in like fish passage or brook trout, bring it in, take a look. So I took the liberty of going ahead and bringing in this data set already. And Michael and I talked a little bit ahead of time, and we're going to focus on the Fort Meade area. And so I have a little bookmark here. And the nice thing is these web map viewers kind of remember where you are. So one thing looking at this area right away that I notice is we actually have the most effective basins, that map that I showed you earlier turned on here. So we can see just north and just south of the Fort Meade area, we're meeting some of those requirements from EPA about the potential for reducing water quality benefits as well as being in underserved areas. And if we wanted to look in a little bit more detail, actually I didn't turn the green infrastructure on. There we go, now it's on. You know, Michael mentioned that these dark green areas are areas that are existing protected based on zoning or easement or some other mechanism. There's also the opportunity to bring in the easement, the fee and easement protected lands data that we have. And so you can begin to start to piece together a network of areas that you might want to target your land conservation. So I'm just going to turn some of these off so that we're not too busy here. Go ahead and turn our healthy watershed assessment layer off as well. But if we start to turn on some of these DEIJ layers, like currently we have linguistically isolated population, as well as less than high school. So we can see that there's some overlap between those areas. We also might want to look at the age of the population. Maybe if there's a lot of young people, we want to make sure that there are some parks or playgrounds within any protected lands that we create. And so, you know, I'm not here to kind of tell Michael where he should target his resources, but it is a nice opportunity to be able to kind of turn on and off some of these layers. If you're sort of trying to decide on an area here, you know, you might want to kind of target in and hone in on the areas that would further connect your green infrastructure opportunities. So perhaps, you know, through here might be a good candidate, for example, or up here along this area. This is all within a most effective basin area. So not only, you know, potentially if Anne Arundel County is working with EPA or other organizations to justify some of the work that they want to be doing, they might be able to utilize a map like this in order to understand what opportunities are there. So with that, it was just a real quick and dirty. I have a few more presentations or slides to share with you. Are you seeing the right view now, or did it switch on us again? I'm going to keep moving. So
it switched again.
It did.
So just go and hit display. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just going to do that every time.
There you go. Perfect.
So I just want to highlight some new data that we have coming down the pike. A lot of you in the Chesapeake region, and I know we have some guests from outside of the region. We've been working over the years under the leadership of Peter Claggett and our land data team to create some additional what are they calling it? Very high resolution land use, land cover data. And there's sort of two versions of this. There's a simplified version and a more complex version, but essentially it's taking very high resolution data and augmenting it with ancillary data related to pulled from zoning information and streams and wetland and other key information where all the road networks are, and essentially creating one of the best data sets that we've had for understanding land use and land use change throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed in the past. And so some of you planners might get excited about having some additional level of detail available. This data is going to be we're doing a wide rollout, and so we can try to get information out through the Virginia APA information, but we will be having webinars and download information and details about how to potentially work with this data. And you'll also be able to download metrics related to land use change if you want to look at a specific area, looking at vulnerability or impervious surface change. We'll have some great opportunities there as well. And so the key data that will be released with that are, you know, tabular summaries looking at change matrices, understanding and interpreting, as well as the county scale, the web viewers. So similar look and feel of some of the other web viewers that I've shared with you. And we kind of had a glimpse of the healthy watershed assessment already, but we've got over 32 metrics in here looking at habitat, geomorphology, water quality. It can be really helpful to characterize and look at the catchment level data within your jurisdictions and potentially add some context depending upon what your interests are. There's also multiple vulnerability or stressor metrics that we have related to forest loss, impervious surface change, land protection percentage. So there's some great information that could potentially be used to inform not only where healthy watersheds are, but other applications. And then the final thing I just want to talk about is actually something that we call the land policy BMPs, which essentially provides you an opportunity to look at if you were to implement certain practices on the ground, looking at sort of a status quo or current zoning, or if you were to potentially really target your high value, most valued lands through a forest conservation or growth management or farmland conservation scenario, how would that change your loading rates associated with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL into the future. And so there's a great dashboard that we have that allows you to kind of visualize that as well. And with that, that's all I had for you. Hopefully that was a good teaser. And I look forward to talking with you all again in the future.
Thank you, Renee. So we are going to introduce our last presenter, Miss Carolyn Poissant. Miss Carolyn Poissant has a MLA, MPA, and the AICP certification. She is a community planner and landscape architect, as well as an avid bicycle commuter, hiker, and nature photographer. Miss Carolyn has spent the majority of her career managing the recreational facilities and trail planning, design, and construction projects, in addition to performing various types of community development work. She lived and worked in several Western states, including Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and Montana, prior to taking a position with the city of Newport News in Virginia in May 2019. She is the planning coordinator for the Birthplace of America Trail and project manager for the Newport News Citywide Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. She and her trusty Labrador Retriever, Daisy, can be found on various trails in the area every weekend. Carolyn has a bachelor's and a master's from the University of Michigan, as well as a master's of public administration from the Eastern Michigan University. To you, Ms. Poissant.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here as well, I think. There we go. Does that look right?
Yep.
Am I on the right kind? Okay. Great. So I'm happy to share with you some more specifics on more local projects that'll kind of be a tighter scale than what we've been talking about. That was amazing information coming and looking at the whole Chesapeake Bay watershed. But these 4 projects are from Hampton Roads area, as well as a couple out west. Let's see, where am I? There we go. So, you know, I'm sure you all know that successful planning that's multi-jurisdictional involves a lot of resources and coordination and writing grants and everything. Can take a lot of effort and a lot of time, but hopefully in the long run, it's worth it, right? Starting out, the Birthplace America Trail is a regional effort here in the Hampton Roads region. And it is an extension of the Virginia Capital Trail coming out of Richmond and traveling all the way down around the James River. This is the James City County, York County, Newport News side, and Hampton. And then here we go into Isle of Wight County and down into Suffolk and over to the Virginia Beach waterfront. And this area is built and a couple other little pieces are built, but it's really an effort that is just starting, and we're working on funding. It's in the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization long range plan, and that, so that's helping us move along. And the next step is to build it. So as I mentioned, it's multi-jurisdictional. Of course, we're hoping for tourism enhancement and economic benefits, educational components. The part that is in Newport News is on watershed protection area land. So that's managed by our Waterworks department. And we're actually adjacent to the National Park, Colonial National Historic Park. And we're working with them right now on some partnerships. So the different sources of funding we're looking at are Transportation Alternatives Smart Scale. We actually have received a couple of those. I'm currently working on a federal lands access program grant. The Park Service is considering the Connections to Underserved Gateway Communities program. We've put in for raise grants. We're not successful last year, but we're going to keep trying. And then Transportation, Housing, Urban Development is considered an earmark through your congressional representative. We're working on one of those right now. CMAQ is a little more focused on air quality issues related to reducing vehicle emissions, and then of course Land and Water Conservation Fund and State and Rec Trails programs. This is a little more detail specific to our Newport News Park area, and we have received TAP funding for these pieces. This is where the city starts. This is our park. We're going for a FLAP grant that will take us to Colonial National Historic Park, which has the historic tour roads. This is also known as the Yorktown Battleground area. And then connecting down in the park through our golf course and then continuing down into York County and Hampton. And this, the unfortunate part of all of this is, I'm sure you know, with inflation and cost increases, the budgets just keep going up and up and up. So this started out as 3.5, 4 million, and now we're at 7 million, which I'm hoping we can do it for less. But of course, with federal grants, you have to do a NEPA analysis and environmental analysis. And we do have some wetlands in here, although this is an existing gravel trail. And so there won't be as much disturbance, hopefully. Oops. Okay. Then another project here is in association with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, and they're expanding their James River treatment plant to include a SWIFT facility, which is safe water for tomorrow, something to that effect. But basically it's a tertiary or very high level treatment system that will then re-inject water into the Potomac aquifer in order to recharge the aquifer for the whole region. And so HRSD purchased this piece of land from the city. They're building a new administration building. And then this is the whole park itself. They will be constructing a pathway system along the waterfront and connecting into the park's or existing trails. It'll be a lot of disruption in the park, but I think it's a good example of sort of a local public-private partnership effort, and has definitely benefits for the community in terms of the trails and as well as the water quality benefits. And this is just a cross-section elevation. We're preserving much of the wooded area, but there will be some disturbance in the trail corridor. We're doing some BMPs there, of course, and then there's some living shoreline improvements and a boardwalk along the edge of the water. So we won't be having people right down at the watershed, at the waterfront. As you know, that can be an issue. But we're looking forward that the whole project is expected to take about 5 years. And I mentioned all of the different values. Oh, what I forgot to mention is that HRSD is also trading credits for nutrient discharge. So in terms of the SWIP or SWIP system and water quality permitting, so they're giving some of those credits to the localities in exchange for the efforts that they're doing. And then moving out west, just for another local example, I was with the city of Bozeman, Montana, and we undertook a project, just a small 800-foot section of Bozeman Creek, which is originates in the Gallatin Range of the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, and was very channelized, came through town mainly to handle stormwater and agricultural runoff before it entered the East Gallatin River, which is a tributary of the Missouri. So its ecosystem function had been really degraded. We did have several grant funding sources, worked with the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. The Gallatin Watershed Foundation. Gallatin Valley Land Trust is a local organization that was very active in conservation easements as well as trail projects. And then we had several state of Montana grants that are kind of typical for most states. And the city had dedicated funding for the project. So the project involved creating some meanders in the alignment of the stream, and fish habitat pools. We expanded floodplain capacity, and the willow wattles were used instead of armoring of the edges, as you can see here. And there were a lot of other native shrub plantings and tree plantings and native grasses planted throughout. And I did have to obtain easements from the property owners on that side of the river. This is the park right here, Boger Park. That was where the floodplain expansion occurred. And we also utilized the recreational trail program grant for this custom little footbridge that was done by a local architect that has, you know, little viewing platform and whatnot. So that was a very fun part of the project to design. This is just the ribbon cutting with the mayor and a future landscape architect. And I did want to mention that anytime you undertake these restoration projects, it's really key to spend the good next 2 or 3 years doing meticulous maintenance to remove invasives and any undesirable things that show up. Plantings, as you know, when you get topsoil imported, you often have weed seeds, and it can be very difficult to continue to utilize those areas if you don't maintain them properly. Spurring Mill Park in Bozeman was another project we undertook with this Trust for Public Land, which was an amazing partner. This was a 55-acre project that we had an old former mobile home park that was converted into sort of a nature park with a labyrinth and trails and gardens, and there was a protected wetland area, and we also did some floodplain enhancement, floodplain capacity there. And Trust for Public Land was an amazing partner. They actually brought $11 million into the project just purely from private funds, and they actually helped us purchase. This building was a former Boys and Girls Club building that had been vacant, and we purchased that and put our entire Parks Department there. So that was a pretty fortunate thing. Not a bad place to live, as you can imagine. In Denver, the Sand Creek Regional Greenway and South Platte River Greenways are a network that form a 50-mile continuous multi-use shared use path system all the way around Denver. And much of this, or parts of it, actually most of it, was associated with corridors that had some easements already preserved under the Denver water system, because the city of Denver had a system of canals and things like that that fed into its water supply, and those maintenance roads and whatnot were used as trails. But we did have to get, especially in Commerce City, a lot of easements here through here. And the Greenway itself was a major part of redevelopment of open space in the after the closure of Stapleton Airport, where the city acquired over 800 acres of new open space. This and then additionally, the Cherry Creek stewardship plan was the Cherry Creek Basin, which is only 250,000 acres as opposed to 40 million acres, I think the Chesapeake Bay is. But it was another partnership with Trust for Public Land, partly funded with Great Outdoors Colorado Legacy Funds. They have a lot of wonderful funding for recreation in Colorado. And I worked on that plan with the Trust for Public Land, and TPL now has several programs for both conservation of open space and recreation, and they're working more in urban areas. So I encourage people to look into partnerships with them if you haven't already. And then Denver, this shows some of the historic flooding that, of course, occurred back in the 1900s there. And in Denver downtown, it's very recreation oriented and commuter oriented. As a bicycle commuter, I rode my bike to work from 10 miles out into downtown Denver every day. It took me about 30 minutes, so it had taken more than that driving. So the nice thing about the Cherry Creek Greenway you see here is, although it's armored, it is a floodplain. It does flood occasionally, but it goes under the streets. So you can literally just get on your bike and go. And this is the Platte River where the confluence is. And this was a kayak park that was developed with the drop structures and the overflow you can see. And I actually worked in this building over there, which was very nice. And millions of people, of course, enjoy this resource. There's additional elements along the South Platte that allow access by the neighborhoods, and there are a lot of underserved populations in and around the Denver metropolitan area. So grants can be structured for the different neighborhoods, and recreation access is always a good partnering element to have in any of these efforts. So Denver has a huge system of trails that are amazing, and there's also other conservation plans underway. This is Bluff Lake Nature Center that had conservation elements. Just shows an infiltration pavement on a trail. Greenway areas protecting the buffer next to a lot of housing development that's happening out there in more rural areas that were protected in the Sand Creek Regional Greenway as well. And I just have to say that if you get a chance, hit the trail and wherever it takes you. Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. So we just have one more Mentimeter poll we want to share with you on barriers. So I'll turn it over to Caroline one more time. And looking over the questions in the meantime, panelists, to see if there's any particular questions that have not been answered or you want to elaborate on before we close. So what barriers does your jurisdiction face in land conservation? You could just vote. Let's see what people are thinking. Funding, lots of funding, yep. Land costs, loss of private land. Just no place to put it. Township is built out. Maintenance, yeah, we didn't talk too much about that, but yeah, it's another factor to think about. So leave this up for a minute and then turn it back over to Ross and just see if any of the panelists or Ross want to comment on some of these barriers. Just open it up for just a minute before we close.
I can go first. I actually work for NAFAC at the Naval Academy, and I actually went to school in the Hampton Roads area. So Ms. Passant, that was very, it was near and dear to me. But no, I would say that my jurisdiction that I live in, Bozeman City, I personally would say that I would say funding, that's a big thing. But yeah, I'll let the other panelists talk about that a little bit more.
Hi, this is John. This is going to vary based on the state and the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but there has been an upswing in funding, as you saw on my slides, at the federal level, as well as in many states. And I know in Maryland, part of that was because of the effects of the pandemic, where many parks and trails were oversubscribed here and around the country, on the one hand, and then for disadvantaged or underserved communities, they had a very hard time traveling to parks or trails. So they kind of got trapped in their own neighborhoods. And that's why the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership wants to focus on, in the main, greening projects of various dimensions within those communities, so they're really accessible. So let's see. Most jurisdictions do not or seldom use eminent domain to acquire a property for conservation purposes. So I know with some folks, their property rights can be an issue, but in the main, it's a willing seller and a willing buyer. So no one's forcing landowners into selling an easement or selling their land in fee. Let's see. Yes, in some areas, it's very costly, particularly waterfront, if you're talking about parks, to purchase them because of the relatively higher land assessments. And I'd like to also comment on the dedicated funding source, because that's critical. Land conservation, doing a project can take, 2+ years because of all the steps you have to go through, negotiations with the property owner. And so land conservation is greatly supported if jurisdictions can create a dedicated funding source. In Maryland, which I'm most familiar with, it's program Open Space, which has been around since the early 70s. I think Michael alluded to that. And that's 0.5% state real estate transfer tax. Now, the fund has been raided from time to time when the state has gotten into rather severe budgetary times, but that's what you need. And it can't be done property by property, year by year through annual budgets. Anyway, that's just off the top of my head looking at some of these barriers.
Does anyone else want to comment before we close? Nope. All right. Well, I'm going to ask Carolyn to close that down, and then we're just going to move to closing. This has been great. I've learned so much. It's been tremendously helpful to hear about all the funding resources for sure, and all the tools that are available. I wanted to make sure that everybody got that link to all of the resources. We have very, very robust list of resources for this webinar, so I appreciate that. I put it in the chat. It's also up here on the slide. And please do reach out if you don't get an opportunity to copy this link so that you can see all these tremendous resources. Just a great deal of great information. Thank you very much. So thanks, everybody. Next webinar is going to be a month from today, and we're going to be moving to Pennsylvania, to the Pennsylvania APA chapter. They're going to be hosting us on the One Water approach and how it benefits the Bay. And just as a reminder, there's the ASCP number that you can look up for your credits. And I look forward to seeing y'all next month. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day.